Everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds, peering into the creative space on this episode of author and creator C.E. Massari. C.E., welcome. Thank you for joining.
I'm very happy to be here. Always happy to talk. I do that a lot. Excited to be here, talk about the book, talk about anything that is going to come up in our conversation.
Yes, glad to have you. Glad to talk comics, and we're talking about the book, The Mafia versus the Klan. You've also worked in the world of Six Swords, is this right?
That's correct. And I did, if you can call it that, comic journalism. I kind of got to start with Ain't It Cool News. There was some time ago where I didn't always want to mention that, depending on who the person was. A little bit of a mixed feelings as far as Ain't It Cool News goes, but worked with Mark Miller, not the famous Mark Miller, but the independent comic creator now, Mark Miller for Black Mass. He was great. Atomic Bug, I think, was the handle he went with for comic reviews. So that's kind of how I got started. Did a couple other companies, Comics First as they existed, Monkeys Fighting Robots, Heavy.com, a few other things. So yeah, and then I did the Six Swords, did Case Babe, a wrestling anthology, volume three. Took a little time off, tried to do a literary agent thing. It did not work out. So I am back, unfortunately, having to do it on my own. I say that tongue in cheek.
Oh, yeah, I get you. I get you. The publishing world is it's one where you kind of have to explore and find what works best and find your people in a way.
Yeah. And unfortunately, the best people is usually yourself, putting yourself out there,
Yeah,
making sure it gets done.
yeah. Now, I'll ask about your origins in comics in a bit, but since we're talking about the creative energy of the independent world, how do you sustain yourself doing kind of the marketing, the creating, the all the many aspects of what you do?
I don't, and I say that also tongue in cheek. A lot of so when I did the Six Swords, I guess it's been like 10 years now. When I did that, I had a lot more time, a lot more energy. I was 10 years younger, so the grind was a lot easier. It was a lot easier to go to conventions. It was a lot easier to be young and dumb with money and throw it at a wall and burn it. But now as a responsible adult with a family, kids, mortgage, all that fun stuff, I have to be much more surgical and strategic. And a lot of my philosophy when I was trying to look for a literary agent was like, I don't have a lot of time. I've got kids, I've got a job, I've got all these different things going on. Like I really need, I know it doesn't really work this way, but I need to focus on the writing. I make the thing, you sell the thing, and that's how it's going to work. It did not work out that way, unfortunately. I will probably eventually look for an agent again, but at the time, I was able to get published under the Source Point banner. I've known Dirk Manning for years. Dirk's hands down the biggest influence as far as the comic world goes for me personally, as far as mentorship, guiding me, directing me, giving me advice, things, the do's and don'ts, whether I've listened to them or not, the whole other thing. Um, but as far as sustaining myself in the marketing, I've gone from, hey, I'm 24, 25. It doesn't matter if I spend a little extra money on this. Well, that kind of affected me long term. I spent a lot of money on the Six Sword up front. I was like, oh, we're going to make all this money. We're going to make boatloads of money in independent comics. And then, I didn't have that money anymore. So when I got better as a writer, I got more intelligent as far as the business work, more savvy. It wasn't there. I also, again, kids, family, I had to be strategic about what I can spend. I can't just, pay thousands of dollars for an artist to write a book and it goes nowhere. It's like, oh, it's whatever. So as far as my method now everything is well thought out. It's well timed.
Mhm.
I lose a lot of extra time in my life as far as things I can do, as far as we'll just say vacations or going out or doing other things. My life is work, family, and then I would say the writing thing for the little amount of time that I get. And for this particular upcoming campaign, I've kind of already planned out how I'm going to do the marketing, what money I'm going to put into it, and a lot of groundwork. Think of it almost like a political campaign. I plan to do, or at least for the Mafia vs. Clan, for the Kickstarter and the pre-sales and everything. Go to a lot of comic shops, hit as many conventions as I can while the campaign's actually going on. Hand out flyers, hand out free things, see if I can pick people up extra $500 on Facebook ads kind of things. So I've kind of had to change my strategy, just because money is not as free flowing as it used to be. Not that I ever had it, but possibilities are
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. In terms of the book itself, anything that you'd like to say about the premise? I know a little bit about it from what you've shared with me, and I know that we have some true to life connections. So anything that you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, so the book is loosely based off of a lot of series of events that happened in my grandfather's life. So there is a very much a mix of fiction and a mix of nonfiction. The mafia aspect is fictional. My grandfather was not in the mafia, although as a South Philly boy who knew a lot of people, he did cross paths. He knew people um, who were. He was never involved in the mob, but he did know people. My dad knows some of those people who he crossed paths with, but he was not involved in the mob. The KKK aspect is a little more nonfiction. My grandfather was an Italian immigrant. He had a restaurant in Hampton, Virginia. If anyone's familiar with Hampton, Virginia, it's not, the
Hmm.
dirty, dirty South, but it is south of the Mason-Dixon line. And he had a restaurant, and he would drive his kitchen workers, who were African American, kind of to and fro work. He'd eat lunch with them. He'd just kind of hang out with them. He was very normal. Um, and the local people were not fans of that. I know at one point the KKK supposedly picketed his restaurant, for the people he was hiring, as well as him being an Italian and owning the business. It was kind of like a Woolworths restaurant kind of thing. I can't remember the name. Um, there was actually one guy, and I talked to my dad about this, and he says his memory's a little vague because when they lived in Hampton, my dad was younger, so he said a lot of the things that he might have seen or occurred, he probably doesn't remember or it just didn't register as a kid. But he did say there was one event where he kind of describes it as a stereotypical like big country guy kind of tell my grandfather, I was like, you should go back home, you should go back to your people, you should get out of town kind of thing. And my grandfather, in so many words, telling him to F off. So that KKK premise, that's pretty core to the story, is based in real life events that happened to my grandfather. And a secondary event to that, and I am going to spoil this a little bit. So in John Wick, the dog dies, and that's why he goes and kills everyone. Well, in my book, I take the fiction of the very real life event of my great aunt's murder. I use that as kind of the catalyst that drives this character to go on his John Wick-esque kind of revenge tour. My great aunt was someone that no one in my family was knew. They knew about her. They knew about her death, but it was kind of this vague story that my aunt and my dad knew that, hey, your grandfather's sister was murdered, and they knew a little bit of pieces. I ended up doing a lot of sleuth work, Ancestry.com and these different things. Kind of stumbled upon it. I was actually looking up information, doing all the work on my own Italian citizenship. At the time, I was uh, eligible for dual citizenship with Italy. It was also recently changed in the last year, and unfortunately, I got a little screwed out of it. But that is what it is. That's another story. But doing a lot of the groundwork on our genealogy and our history, I ended up finding kind of like a police notice. I feel like a report that said Augustina Massari, gunshot wound, these things. I'm like, oh, that's her. Well, I showed my dad. He's like, I never even knew her name. My aunt never knew her name. Her name's Augustina.
Hmm.
So this led like a lot of different events of finding out information. I reached out so my grandfather was a child of three, uh, minus his sister who died. He had a brother who he had mixed relationship with, a lot of turmoil directly related to this murder and kind of how it was handled and how they personally dealt with it. I reached out to his family too, and they knew just as little information. So it was something that my Uncle Joe and my grandfather kind of kept from anyone. I say all that because the events of Augustina's death actually were so big, they were in state level newspapers. So she was murdered in her, so this big event that was statewide, none of my family even knew the name of the individual who died. So that's kind of how close knit and small this was. But it was a really big murder. Um, my great grandmother Felicia, she was an Italian immigrant from Umbria, Norcia, Italy. She spoke next to no English, even up till her death. Her husband, my great grandfather, died when my grandfather was like a year or two. So she had three children. She was a dying immigrant, no money, no husband that she had to raise. So my
Mhm.
grandfather, at 9, 10 years old, he got another job. He was selling newspapers, and he was helping the family kind of, make money, as I'm sure all the kids were doing in some way or form. Well, my great grandmother was renting out a room, and one of the tenants was an individual um, who ended up getting kicked out of the house. From the newspaper reports, and I can only go off of the newspaper reports because unfortunately I don't have the first-hand account because everyone who was there passed away and never provided that information. But from the newspaper accounts and police reports, he had slapped Augustina for essentially talking back to him, and then also, in his words, talking to too many boys. Now, this was a 40-something-year-old man. Augustina was a 16-year-old girl. He was living in the house for at least 8 to 10 years, so you can imagine the creepiness levels rise even more. When the guy
Mhm.
enters the house, he was probably about 6, 7, 8, and lived and kind of watched her grow and develop. The guy seems very much like a manic. I don't know if he's schizophrenic. I don't know if he had some extreme manic bipolar. He had some. If you read some of the interviews, he would be real high and real low in the way that he would talk. He'd be very. They describe him as an excitable Italian. Now, you take the language of the time and you read the words. It's like this dude's clearly not all there. It seems off. And again, he was a 40-something-year-old man, never married. Now, I know in 2026, not marrying is not a big cultural deal. But if you look back at like
Mhm.
the 1930s, like there's not the norm. So again, you start putting red flags. You do your little armchair detectiving. He was off. So anyway, they were at church. Uh, he tried to talk to my great aunt Augustina. She snubs him. She kind of just ignores him. Later that day, he goes back to my great grandmother's house. He comes in the house. He asks her, he's like, I left something in the house after you got kicked out. Can I go get it? She goes upstairs to get it. Well, he shoots her 2 or 3 times in the back. My
Mhm.
grandfather was asleep at the table from working all day. He was 10 years old, grabs a butcher knife, chases an armed guy who he just watched kill his sister out of the house, chases him down the street, loses him. There ended up being a local lynch mob of essentially the community trying to find this guy. The police catch him. The local community, the numbers are growing. It started off at like 50 people, 100 people, supposedly 500 people. I'm not sure on the accuracy of the numbers. Are throwing rocks at the police cars. They're asking to basically kill this guy for what he did to Augustina. They had a procession down one of the major streets in Philadelphia. It was a big event, and it really hurt and impacted the community. And her death is kind of how I use the catalyst in this story to combine the two. I've got mixed feelings about using something that I can honestly say greatly, greatly impacted my grandfather, probably up until his death. I know with
Mhm.
one of my aunts, he was having like literal nightmares and like vivid images of her dying when she was going through a divorce. She was divorcing her husband, and he was having, night terrors that her husband was going to kill her because it still impacted him that much later on in life. My dad explained to me that he didn't know it till later on, but probably in like the 70s, early 80s, my grandfather was actually going to a psychologist. You can imagine kind of the taboo at the time, especially, hardworking Italian man or Italian immigrant going to a psychologist, and just the cultural dynamics that it just goes into as America as a whole and mental health, that he was
Mhm.
actually seeking out mental health. And you can kind of imagine where he was at in his life mentally from this one event that's been carried with him for the rest of his life. I talked to my cousin who had said that when he would do like sleepovers, he'd see my grandfather just kind of like sitting in a couch in the corner, just smoking a cigarette, just wide awake. Being 10 years old, watching your sister get murdered, um, right in front of you. That's, you know, tough to deal with. So that's kind of that catalyst and combining that fictional event with, like I said, the KKK and the actual inspiration to kind of wrap up my very long tirade. Started because my dad was watching a military channel episode titled Mafia vs. KKK. I was like, oh, that'd be a really cool idea for like a comic book or something. I was like, yeah, that does sound like a really good idea. So I watched it, and then I just let the creative process happen. And then,
Hmm.
it starts, oh, I got this information from my grandfather, started combining things. And I actually started the script as a 5-page script in the Comics Experience Intro to Writing class with Andy Schmidt back in like 2018, 2019. And then I just expanded it out with more information all the way up to the 110-page graphic novel it now is.
I appreciate so much how you talk about like the parts of it that are fact, the parts of it that are fiction. Like, every family has stories and every person has stories, and I appreciate how you're kind of putting boundaries around that and kind of explaining it that way too. So kudos to you for approaching it that way.
Appreciate it. And for anyone who is interested, there is a podcast called the Italian American Stories Podcast. I worked with them, and they actually did an episode on my aunt, Augustina Massari. I can't remember which episode, but if you look up Italian American Stories, Augustina Massari, they do a great deep dive into the actual murder and all the events that kind of transpired. I started on my Substack, just kind of my own story with it, and like many things as a creative person, you start something and then you don't finish it, and it takes some time to get back to it.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like you spent a great deal of time in the research part of this too, just through the like family story, ancestry.com, looking at newspapers. I mean, it sounds like this is a story that you spent some time with and really wanted to flesh out.
Well, absolutely. I take my 3 or 4 credits of history in my undergrad very seriously, of trying to be objective. But like I said, when I was growing up, the story of Augustina was, hey, your grandfather's sister was murdered, and we were always unsure. Was it a stalker of his mother? Or supposedly it was a stalker of you know, his sister who just didn't want to date him. There was a lot of mystery to it and vagueness. And if I had not, you know, if honestly, if the internet didn't exist and the ability to scrub kind of all these newspapers didn't exist, it would have completely died, and we would have never known it. So I'm very grateful um, that I was able to find it. Like I said, I happened to be going through a lot of documentation for a completely separate thing. Like I said, it was for my Italian citizenship. Um, and it just happened to put me on this road of history. And like I said, I pulled those newspapers. I looked up a lot of information, and surprisingly, you're always curious because family stories are like sailor stories. Like, oh, I caught a bass, and really, it's like you caught nothing. So you're
Uh-huh.
never really sure about how much information is accurate and how much it's not. My grandfather's story, as far as what we knew about Augustina's death, was very accurate. Um, the way that he told the story about the KKK and the events that happened they didn't change. And I've asked a couple other family members, and the stories stayed pretty consistent. So as much as firsthand account, as anyone who is doing any kind of analytic work, whether it's history, journalism, those kind of things, you guys take it somewhat with a grain of salt. But considering the track record and the accuracy, I think the stories are probably near accurate. Probably not perfect. We all embellish and the mind is mind things. We're probably 90% there as far as like the historicalness to them.
Yeah, yeah. Being that it sounds like there's so much history and also so much action and mystery that's part of the story, I imagine a visual medium like comics allowed you to do a lot with that too.
Yeah. And I got a very good artist, which I will, I'll send you the pictures. The artist I got, Martin Jimenez, he does an amazing job. I am absolutely blessed, and it was we'll call it divine providence that I ended up stumbling upon him. I was actually looking for a completely different, excuse me, a completely different artist for a completely different book. He happened to send me an email. It was one of those things like you put it on Reddit, you put it on Facebook. Hey, I'm looking for an artist for this project. Send me your resume. He sent it, and as soon as I saw it, I was like, that's the guy. I have been looking for the person for this book. I was like, this project, no. I have another one, and I completely dropped what I was doing for this other project because I had to grab him. He's absolutely perfect for the medium. And there's certain ways that, yeah, you can make this a movie. Yeah, you can write this as a novel, but comics are very unique in the medium when you mix the visuals. And the way that I write the script is I've definitely tried to, you know, make the best of the comic medium as I can. I really like, and I don't know if you read his Substack, Aubrey Sitterton.
Hmm.
His
Hmm.
Free Planet stuff, where in the process of him making Free Planet, he's really tried to press, in his vision, his way, press the artistic medium and press the comics medium. In Mafia vs. Clan, I've tried to do the same thing. I've tried to make theological elements because there's a theological thread about essentially giving away your soul to get your revenge, and making sure that in the script prompt, like, hey, make the shadowing this way or make something look this way, so you kind of get that back arch that if you're writing a novel, you have to imply a lot of things, and when you're doing things cinematically, a lot of it's in the artist's hands. If you're writing the script, doesn't mean the director's going to see it that way. With the comics medium, I can kind of guide things a little more and present those points. And the way the art's being done is it's specifically done in kind of like a Sin City way, where the bulk of the story is going to be black and white. However, there's going to be a lot of very, not select, where there's no color, but the coloring is done deliberately. When there's blood, it's going to be purposely red. There might be some other scenes where there's purposely light being illuminated for one reason or another. Like I said, trying to really push the comic medium. So in a lot of ways, the time that I took from the Six Swords, where I wrote it with other writers, and it was my first real comic project, where it's like, oh, I'm going to be edgy, I'm going to be cool. And there's going to be a lot of cursing and action and all this kind of stuff. I've very much matured in the last 10 years, as in how to try to push the comics medium to be used in the way that it's used best, which is that visual aspect.
Yeah, yeah. Where did that love of comics come from for you? Because I know you were talking about watching the movie with or the documentary with your grandfather and some of that. So was he part of that story as well, or did that love kind of come from other places?
So my love of comics is definitely from like Saturday morning cartoons. The '90s Spider-Man, the '90s X-Men, the '90s Spider-Man was my absolute favorite show, but Spider-Man's always my favorite character. I was going to comic conventions locally in like comic book shops when I was like 8, 9 years old. There was one in Philly that it's no longer there. It's now where they put in the Xfinity Casino, but there used to be like a Holiday Inn, and they had this like really crappy, like half a room comic convention that I went to a couple times with some friends. It's just comics were a thing as far back as I can remember. Spider-Man was always my favorite character. I've grown since then, and there's a lot of other characters that have had big impacts. I've come to absolutely. I used to hate Superman or dislike him a lot. I've come to absolutely, undyingly appreciate him, and I will defend the Superman character to the end of the world. I actually wrote a really, really long essay on the philosophy of Superman and kind of get behind the moral and ethical framework of why Superman is so quintessential, and how he represents a lot of other themes. And I think that I could see his face in uh, Max Landis. Max Landis does a really great video essay on why Superman is just great here. But my love of comics definitely came from Saturday morning cartoons and just building, wanting to read more. I remember one of my friends, he's a lawyer now, he used to bring Daredevil comic to like show and tell stuff. I was like, oh, these are awesome. I want to go get my own. So that kind of just, it blossomed from there. And it's petered. I got really, really into comics again at the end of high school and in college, when again a lot more free time and money, where I was spending a boatload of money on comics, going to conventions, doing the comics journalism thing. So I was like reading everything under the sun because I was trying to do reviews, I was trying to do interviews, I was trying to do all this stuff. I haven't really read much, I'd say, in the last 5 years, maybe sparsely. I actually just a week ago, I finally got my oldest son pulled in. He's going to start doing Absolute Batman, and I think Moon Knight. At least for him, I personally, like I said, I don't have the time to read like I used to because I'm doing so many other things. A lot of my readings now, like uh, it's like prose stuff, and my prose stuff is really boring, like philosophy or ethics or religious, whatever, other kind of things. I've got Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology. I've got a big list of like Journey to the West, uh, the prose and the Eddas and all like the boring old stuff. I'm like, I know the really, really good writers wrote this, and I've listened to enough podcasts and YouTube videos. Like I actually need to sit down and read these things, do some highlights, and do some real, adult level literature research.
Yeah, I was once upon a time a theology major, so I'm
Oh,
right
there
there
you
with
go.
you. That's
Yeah,
interesting stuff. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I always make a joke about it. One of my undergrads is in philosophy and religious studies, and I always make the that '70s show joke. The philosophy factory didn't have any more jobs, so I'm trying to apply it to comics.
yes, yes, absolutely. There's so much storytelling that goes on
Oh
in
yeah,
philosophy, theology. There's so many symbols. So yeah, there's a lot there to unpack.
and I definitely I'm a big Tolkien fan. I'm a big C.S. Lewis fan. However, I am very much in the Tolkien vein of I don't like allegory. I like application, so I try to avoid allegory and things that are too on the nose. Although I am not at his level anywhere near it. But as far as like a creative taker, a creative approach on storytelling as a whole, I'm not a big fan of allegory.
Yeah, it's a little neat and tidy. Unless you're really good at
Y-
it, it's a little neat and
Yes,
tidy.
yeah, yes. It's very, very difficult to do. You have to be, like I said, it's at least out of my wheelhouse.
Yeah. Um, Now, what is your plan as far as unrolling the book? What can listeners expect if they want to check out more and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so as far as the book itself, we're going to be launching in September 15th. That'll be the Kickstarter date for the pre-sale. It'll run from September 15th into October, which is Italian American Heritage Month. So it'll hit that check mark that I really want as far as the theme for the book. Um, and then once that's finished, it gets printed and then it goes off to SourcePoint Press. They do their printing things and it goes out to the world. So the Kickstarter will run for that month. I'm actually today I was pricing out a lot of things that I'm trying to get planned out for September to make sure that I have all my financial numbers in place, the packing and all that stuff. A lot of that's going to fluctuate. Um, I've learned that shipping the numbers can change week to week. The packing stuff can make or break a lot of things. So I don't want to get too far into the weeds, and then things are completely different in August. But I've been trying to run my numbers. September 15th to October 15th will be the Kickstarter. I've got a couple stretch goals I'm trying to figure out that I think people like. One of which I just worked with my editor yesterday about the sequel. I was really unsure about a sequel, but I felt that the ending of this book, I needed the character to kind of have a redemption of sorts and a wrap up. Now that redemption could mean a lot of different things, but it could be done as a standalone story. But my artist Martin is so good, it would be a waste of not having him do a second one. Also, I think it just kind of neatly ties up the story. So one of the stretch goals I'm hoping to do is have like 5 pages from the sequel as part of a stretch goal for the campaign for this one, so that when this book's done, it does well. Either next year, or the following year, we can come out with a sequel. I just got kind of the green light as far as the summary goes from my artist Trina Joe, who works with a bunch of the Source Point creators. She's fantastic, so we had some really good talks about that recently. So this went from oh no, this is a one and done. I think it's enough to know this 100% has to get a sequel. At least alone for the fact that Martin's an amazing artist and he kills it. So I just got to write it for him.
Yeah. Cool. Um, if I'm a listener and I want to find out more, if I want to follow along and keep up with the campaign and the work as you're doing it, where might I go to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am on Substack, CE Massari, Master of None. I do a lot of things that I'm not quite good at, but I'm not quite bad at. I'm pretty competent in a lot of things, but I'm a Master of None. That's what I kind of themed my Substack after. Then Instagram, CE Massari, and then Facebook, CE Massari. I'm most active on Instagram and Substack where I kind of used as my monthly newsletter, as well as my opportunity to just write random things that kind of piqued my interest. I wrote a 3 essay article on Diogenes and South Park. That's where my philosophy of Superman things at. I'm doing now kind of a take on a good, evil, and the in between. I tie together J.R.R. Tolkien and professional wrestling. So it's also a place where I put up interviews that I've done, just random kind of things. That's where I'm most active, and then Instagram and then Facebook are kind of the other social media checkbox to have there. I don't do Twitter. Unfortunately, when it went to X, I was like, yeah, this is I'm done with this. I don't need any more social media. I need to spend less time on social media, although I know that's important as a creator to be active. So basically blogging the best that's my limit.
I hear that. I absolutely hear that. And now I'm thinking about like Thor and Oakenshield versus like Jake the Snake Roberts. I think that would make a great
Yeah,
like match. I'm thinking.
yeah, yeah.
Well, many thanks for the talk through. Glad to have you back anytime. Did we miss anything that you want to make sure to include on this recording?
Uh, yeah. I guess the biggest plug that I can give for the book is the Mafia KKK is John Wick meets The Godfather. Yes, does it have some deep themes in the background, but at the very core, like the name, the Mafia the KKK, just take that alone. That's a fun idea. It's a cool idea. You know, there's side of the story it is that there's a lot of violence. There's a lot of character in it. Like I said, if the name alone doesn't sell you, if you like John Wick and you like that kind of stuff, if you like The Godfather, there's a lot in there to enjoy. It's not high and mighty snooty stuff. No, it's a funny picture book with violence, and if you don't like action movies, then I don't know what to
That's right. That's right. Just when I'm out.
tell you.
Many thanks again, and may the conversation continue.
Yep, I appreciate the time and look forward to hopefully coming back too.
Anytime, anytime.